So, what exactly happens when a top ranking, incredibly powerful US senator just vanishes from the public eye? Honestly, it sounds like the setup for a political thriller, but as recent breaking news has shown us, it's a very real scenario. When a top leader disappears into a hospital room and the official updates just completely stop coming, the ripple effects are immediate. But beyond the sensational headlines and the rumors, there's a much deeper, really structural question we need to ask about our government. Welcome to this explainer. I'm really excited to guide you through this today because we're looking at a fascinating intersection of breaking news and constitutional law. We're diving into what's known as congressional continuity. To do this, we're going to use a recent, highly publicized medical emergency as a case study to unpack a massive, systemic vulnerability that is literally baked right into the United States government. Okay, here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll cover the McConnell health crisis. Second, rumors and optics. Third, the history of incapacity. Fourth, the missing roles. And finally, proposed reforms. Let's get right into it. Section 1. The McConnell health crisis. On June 14, 2026, an advanced life support ambulance was dispatched to Senator Mitch McConnell's home in Washington. He was hospitalized after suffering a heart attack. But here's the thing that makes this specific situation so notable for our case study. The details remained incredibly scarce. For weeks, his staff released unbelievably vague updates. They would just say things like he was receiving excellent care and that he continues recovery, all while totally declining to specify when, or frankly if, he would actually return to the Capitol. And this context absolutely illustrates why public concern was already running so high. This June 2026 hospitalization, it didn't just happen out of nowhere. It followed a whole string of well-publicized health scares. Back in March 2023, the senator suffered a concussion after a fall at a hotel and missed weeks of work. Later that same summer, you probably remember he froze twice mid-sentence during press conferences, and his aides actually had to step in. Then in 2024, a fall at a GOP luncheon left him with a wrist sprain. When you add all that to his long-acknowledged mobility challenges stemming from childhood polio, you end up with a situation where the public is naturally demanding clarity, but getting almost nothing. Which brings us to Section 2, rumors and optics. This timeline perfectly captures exactly why the rumor mill went into absolute overdrive. Look at this. On June 14th, Senator McConnell is hospitalized. Just 3 days later, on June 17th, his wife, former U.S. Transportation Secretary Elaine Chao, travels to Beijing for a high-level meeting. It wasn't until June 22nd, well over a week after the initial hospitalization, that his staff finally put out a vague statement saying he was working on Senate business while recovering. Having an international trip happen right on the heels of a severe medical emergency, that created some deeply complicated political optics. To really grasp the gravity of that June 17 meeting, check out this quote released by the Chinese embassy. Chinese Vice President Han Zhang noted that they agreed on a new vision of a constructive China-U.S. relationship. So you have this very formal diplomatic exchange happening. At the exact same moment, the American public was entirely in the dark about the health and status of one of their most powerful domestic lawmakers. Now, contrast that very polished international diplomacy with what was happening domestically. Into this massive information void stepped a wave of unverified rumors. Conservative activist Laura Loomer posted on X claiming a source close to the White House told her Senator McConnell was officially brain dead and not coming back. Other internet personalities quickly jumped on this, echoing claims that he was on life support. Now, let me be crystal clear here. None of this was verified, and we are absolutely not taking sides or validating these claims. But we have to look at them as real-world evidence of what happens when a system lacks transparency. Speculation instantly fills the void. Section 3, History of Incapacity. We can pull from research by the Fordham Law School Rule of Law Clinic to see some pretty stark historical examples of this centuries-old loophole. Take Senator Carl Munt of South Dakota. He suffered a stroke in 1969. Now, he never worked again, but he completely refused to resign, meaning he technically remained a sitting senator until his term ended 4 years later in 1973. A similar thing happened with Senator Carter Glass of Virginia. He suffered from severe age-related illnesses starting in 1942, but he actually stayed on as a committee chairman until he died in 1946. In both of these instances, constituents were left entirely unrepresented or severely underrepresented for years. And why does that happen? The crucial point here is simply zero. There are precisely zero specific protocols or procedures in the U.S. Constitution, in federal law, or even in congressional rules for declaring a sitting member of Congress incapacitated. Sure, Congress technically has the power to expel members, but they have never, ever done so for medical reasons. Moving to Section 4, the missing rules. Let's compare how the two chambers actually handle vacancies today. In the Senate, it's slightly more streamlined. Currently, 45 states allow their governors to make immediate, temporary appointments to fill a vacant seat. But the House of Representatives, that is a completely different story. The Constitution strictly requires House vacancies to be filled by special elections, which can easily take months to organize. Under current rules, the House could technically form a provisional quorum and pass laws with as few as 15 members. I mean, just imagine a scenario where a mass casualty event leaves millions of Americans without representation in the House for months, all while a tiny fraction of surviving members passes sweeping national legislation. And listen, this is definitely not just academic theory. Look at these historical close calls. During the 1918 Spanish flu, sickness kept so many lawmakers away that the House operated with fewer than 50 members. On 9/11, United Airlines Flight 93 was likely targeting the Capitol building right while Congress was in session. In 2017, a shooter specifically targeted a congressional baseball game practice. And on January 6, 2021, the Capitol was breached while lawmakers were inside. Every single one of these tragedies could have instantly shifted the balance of power or completely disabled the entire legislative branch. Section 5. Proposed constitutional reforms. So, how do we fix it? The Fordham Law Clinic proposes a beautifully simple 3-step incapacity test. The whole core of this test relies entirely on a member's ability to choose. If a member is in a coma, obviously they can't make a choice. But if they're just physically away, they can still actively choose not to attend. Under this plan, a member would have 5 days to officially attest to their choice. If they cannot do that, they are declared incapacitated, and a temporary successor steps in until the elected member recovers by submitting an affidavit. But that begs the question, who exactly is that successor? Well, the clinic proposes a system where, immediately upon their election, every single lawmaker has to submit a ranked list of 3 designees. If that lawmaker dies or becomes incapacitated, the state governor or the sergeant-at-arms activates this list. This is a real game changer because it solves a massive problem. It maintains democratic legitimacy. By pre-selecting their own successors, a lawmaker ensures that the person stepping in shares their exact political ideology, which preserves the balance of power that the voters originally chose at the ballot box. Furthermore, the clinic proposes a DEFCON-style tiered emergency system for Congress. Level 3 is your baseline, normal readiness. Level 2 is triggered by an imminent threat, and that would allow for things like remote work or alternate meeting locations. Level 1 is the absolute most severe, triggered if a quorum cannot be formed for 24 hours. Only at Level 1 would the emergency incapacity tests and those succession lists be fully activated. And who makes that massive call? The proposal suggests the Gang of 8, that's the top intelligence committee and party leaders, plus the Senate President pro tempore. But to prevent this from just turning into some permanent power grab, they included a really vital safeguard. Any elevated threat level and the subsequent rule changes must be voted on and renewed every 15 days by the available members of Congress. We know emergency powers are inherently dangerous, so this 15-day sunset clause ensures that checks and balances remain fully intact, even in the middle of a crisis. Bringing it all back to our starting point today, the situation surrounding Senator McConnell's hospitalization is a really stark reminder for all of us. Whether it's a single, powerful leader suffering a medical emergency or a potential mass casualty threat to the entire legislative branch, the rumor mill is always going to move instantly. But right now, the actual rules for congressional continuity remain dangerously unwritten. And that leaves the American people totally in the dark and our democratic institutions highly vulnerable. We've seen the historical close calls, and we've seen the modern-day confusion. The academic solutions actually exist, and they are ready to be implemented. Which leaves us with one final, pretty sobering thought to take away from this explainer today. Will it take a full-scale tragedy for Congress to finally write the rules of continuity? Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive. Stay curious, and I'll see you next time.